I never thought much about Theo from accounting until the night of the storm. I mean, I knew who he was. We'd exchanged pleasantries in the break room, nodded at each other in meetings, shared the occasional work email. He was just this quiet guy with dark hair that always fell slightly into his eyes, someone who seemed to prefer his spreadsheets to small talk. I respected that. I was pretty much the same way. It was a Thursday in late October when everything changed. The weather forecast had been calling for rain all week, but nobody expected what actually hit us that evening. By 5 o'clock, the sky had turned this ominous greenish grey, and the wind was rattling the windows on the 14th floor. I was packing up my laptop when the first crack of thunder shook the building. I walked to the window and watched the rain start, not the gentle kind that makes you want to curl up with a book, but the aggressive, almost violent kind that comes down in sheets so thick you can barely see the street below. My car was in the shop. Of course it was. I'd been taking the bus all week, which was fine in normal weather, but this was not normal weather. I pulled out my phone and checked the transit app. Delays everywhere. Buses rerouted. I felt this sinking feeling in my stomach as I realised I might be stuck at the office for hours. That's when I heard his voice behind me. "That's pretty intense out there." I turned around and Theo was standing a few feet away, his messenger bag slung over his shoulder, car keys in his hand. He was looking at the storm too, and there was something about his expression, this mix of concern and fascination, that made me actually look at him for maybe the first time. Really look at him. He had these incredibly expressive eyes, brown with little flecks of gold that I'd never noticed before, probably because I'd never stood this close to him when the office was this empty and quiet. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was doing this weird fluttery thing that I told myself was just anxiety about getting home. I was just trying to figure out my route home. The buses are all messed up. He tilted his head slightly and I noticed the way his hair moved with it. "You take the bus?" "I didn't know that. Where do you live?" When I told him my neighbourhood, something shifted in his expression. "That's basically on my way home. I could give you a ride if you want. I mean, you shouldn't have to wait around here for hours." I should have just said yes. It was a logical offer, a practical solution. But instead I hesitated, and in that hesitation I felt something I couldn't quite name. This awareness of him as a person, not just a coworker. The way he was looking at me, patient and kind, waiting for my answer without any pressure. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't want to put you out." "It's literally on my way," he said, and then he smiled, this small, genuine smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. Besides, driving in this alone is kind of nerve-wracking. I could use the company. So I said yes. We walked to the parking garage together, and I became hyper-aware of everything. The sound of our footsteps echoing in the stairwell, the way he held the door open for me, his hand steady on the metal handle, the faint scent of his cologne, something clean and woodsy that I'd never noticed before because we'd never been in an enclosed space together. His car was a dark blue sedan, neat and clean inside except for a travel coffee mug in the cup holder and a paperback novel on the passenger seat that he quickly moved to the back when we got in. "Sorry," he said, and I caught this hint of embarrassment in his voice. I read during lunch sometimes, when I need to decompress. "What are you reading?" I asked, genuinely curious, and when he told me it was a literary novel I'd been meaning to read for months, we fell into this easy conversation about books that lasted until we pulled out of the garage and into the storm. Then all conversation stopped because the rain was so loud on the roof of the car, so overwhelming, that we both just focused on the road ahead, or rather, he focused on the road. I found myself sneaking glances at him, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, confident, but not tense. The concentration on his face as he navigated through visibility that was basically zero. The way he leaned forward slightly, as if those few inches would help him see better through the downpour. Traffic was crawling. What should have been a 20-minute drive was clearly going to take much longer. We'd barely made it 10 blocks when Theo let out a long breath. "This is pretty bad," he said. "I'm not sure I feel comfortable driving in this. Would you mind if we pulled over somewhere and waited it out for a bit? At least until the worst passes?" "Of course," I said, and I meant it, even though part of me was acutely aware that pulling over meant sitting in a parked car with Theo alone, with nothing to do but talk, or sit in silence. The thought made my pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the storm. He found a spot in a grocery store parking lot, pulled into a space far from the entrance where there weren't any other cars, and turned off the engine. The rain drummed on the roof, creating this cocoon of sound that made the inside of the car feel incredibly intimate and separate from the rest of the world. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could hear him breathing, steady and calm, and I realised I was holding my breath like an idiot. I let it out slowly and turned to look at him. He was already looking at me, and when our eyes met, something passed between us. Not just a glance, but a moment of real connection that made my stomach flip. "So," he said, and there was this slight nervousness in his voice that I'd never heard before. "We work together almost every day, and I barely know anything about you. That's kind of weird, right?" I laughed, and it came out more nervous than I intended. "I was just thinking the same thing. I mean, I know you work in accounting and you read during lunch, but that's about it." "Well," he said, settling back into his seat and turning slightly toward me, "what do you want to know?" And just like that, we started talking. Really talking. Not the superficial office chatter about weekend plans or weather or the latest company memo, but actual conversation. He told me about growing up in a small town upstate, about how he'd always been the quiet kid who preferred books to sports, about moving to the city for college and never leaving because he fell in love with the anonymity and possibility of it. I told him about my family, about my complicated relationship with my father, about how I'd always felt like I was supposed to want things I didn't actually want. He listened in this way that people rarely do, like he was actually hearing me and not just waiting for his turn to talk. The rain continued its assault on the car, but inside I was warm, more than warm. There was this heat building in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the way Theo was looking at me, the way his attention felt like a physical thing. At some point, I'm not even sure when, the conversation shifted, became more personal, more vulnerable. "Can I ask you something?" Theo said, and there was a weight to the question that made me tense slightly. "And you can absolutely tell me if I'm overstepping." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Do you date much? I've never heard you mention anyone, but maybe you're just private about that stuff." My throat felt tight. This was territory I usually avoided, especially with coworkers, but something about the storm, the isolation of the car, the way Theo was looking at me with such genuine curiosity made me want to be honest. "Not really," I said carefully. "I've dated, but nothing that stuck. I think I've been trying to figure some things out about myself." He didn't push, didn't ask the obvious follow-up questions. He just nodded slowly, and then he said something that made my heart stop. "I get that. It took me a long time to figure myself out too, to be honest about what I wanted, who I was attracted to." The way he said it, the weight behind those words, made the implication clear. I looked at him, and he held my gaze, and I saw something in his eyes that I recognized because I'd felt it myself so many times. That vulnerability, that fear of saying too much, but also the courage of being truthful. "Yeah?" I managed to say, and my voice came out barely above a whisper. The rain seemed to get louder, or maybe it was just my heartbeat in my ears. "Yeah," he said, "I'm gay. I don't really advertise it at work because, I don't know, it's never felt relevant to spreadsheets and budget reports, but I don't hide it either. I just live my life." He paused and then added more softly, "I'm only telling you because I feel like maybe you might understand, and if I'm reading this wrong, just tell me and we can forget I said anything." I could have deflected, could have changed the subject, could have made some non-committal response that would have kept me safe behind my walls, but sitting there in that car with Theo, with the storm raging outside and this unexpected intimacy blooming between us, I didn't want to hide anymore. "You're not reading it wrong," I said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff. I've been trying to figure this out about myself for a while now. The attraction to men, I mean. I've never really said it out loud to anyone. The relief on his face was immediate and beautiful. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That takes courage." And then, after a beat, "How does it feel?" saying it out loud. I thought about it, really examined how I felt in that moment. Terrifying, I admitted, but also kind of amazing, like maybe I'm finally being honest with myself. I looked at him and felt this surge of gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that scared me even more than the admission I'd just made. "Can I ask you something now?" "Anything," he said, and he meant it. I could hear it in his voice. "Why did you offer to drive me home tonight?" I asked. "I mean, really? Was it just because it was convenient?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched him wrestle with how to answer. The vulnerability on his face was almost painful to see. "Honestly," he finally said, "I've wanted an excuse to talk to you outside of work for months. I think you're interesting and smart, and, if I'm being completely honest, I've had kind of a crush on you. But I didn't know if you were even into guys, and I didn't want to make things weird at the office. When I saw the storm and realized you needed a ride, it felt like maybe the universe was giving me an opportunity. So I took it." He ran a hand through his hair, making it even messier, and laughed nervously. "That probably sounds ridiculous." It didn't sound ridiculous. It sounded like the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. "I don't think it's ridiculous," I said. "I think it's brave." And then, because apparently tonight was the night for honesty and courage, I added, "I'm glad you offered. This conversation, being here with you, it feels important. Like something I needed without knowing I needed it." "Yeah." The hope in his voice made my chest ache. "Yeah," I confirmed, and then I did something I'd never done before. I reached across the center console and touched his hand where it rested on his thigh. Just a light touch, my fingers barely grazing his knuckles, but the contact sent electricity through my entire body. He inhaled sharply, and then his hand turned over, his fingers intertwining with mine. We sat there like that, holding hands in his parked car while the storm raged outside, and I felt more myself than I ever had in my entire life. "This is my first time," I said quietly. "Holding hands with a guy, I mean. Being this honest about what I want." His thumb stroked across the back of my hand, gentle and reassuring. "How does it feel?" "Right," I said simply. "It feels right." I looked at our joined hands, then up at his face, and found him watching me with such tenderness that it made my breath catch. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I don't really know what I'm doing." "That's okay," Theo said. "I'm a little scared too. This isn't exactly how I imagined this going, but scared doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes the best things are scary because they matter." He squeezed my hand gently. "We can go as slow as you need. There's no pressure here. I just want you to know that I see you, and I like what I see, and if you want to explore this, whatever this is, I'm here for it." The rain was starting to let up, the violent downpour softening to a steady rain. We should have started driving again. We both had homes to get to, lives to return to. But neither of us moved. Neither of us let go. Instead, we kept talking, our voices low and intimate in the darkness of the car. He told me about his first relationship, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned. I told him about my fears, about the expectations I'd always felt from my family, about the relief and terror of finally admitting to myself who I really was. At some point, I realized we'd been sitting there for over an hour. The windows had fogged up from our breathing, creating an even more private world. "I should probably get you home," Theo said reluctantly, "but I don't want this to end. This conversation, this connection. Can I see you again? Outside of work, I mean. Maybe dinner this weekend?" "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. "I'd really like that." He started the car and pulled back onto the road. The storm had passed, leaving the streets wet and glistening under the streetlights. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, still holding hands across the center console, and I found myself memorizing everything about this moment. The warmth of his palm against mine, the quiet concentration on his face as he drove, the way the city lights played across the windshield, the absolute certainty growing in my chest that this was the beginning of something important. When we pulled up outside my apartment building, neither of us wanted to say goodbye. He put the car in park and turned to face me fully. "Thank you," he said, "for being honest with me tonight, for trusting me with something so personal." "Thank you for creating a space where I felt safe enough to be honest," I replied. And then, because I was apparently still riding this wave of courage, I leaned across the console and hugged him. It was awkward with the gear shift between us, but it was also perfect. His arms came around me, solid and warm, and I let myself rest my head against his shoulder for just a moment. He smelled like rain and cologne and possibility. When I pulled back, our faces were close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his eyes even in the dim light from the street lamp. For a second, I thought he might kiss me, and I realized I wanted him to, but he didn't. Instead, he smiled and said, "Saturday night, I'll pick you up at 7. "Saturday at 7, I confirmed. I got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, watching as he waited to make sure I got inside safely. Just before I opened the building door, I turned back and waved. He waved back, and even from that distance I could see his smile. I took the elevator up to my apartment in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the evening. The way he'd offered me a ride, the vulnerability of our conversation, the feeling of his hand in mine, the certainty that my life had just shifted in some fundamental way. I walked into my apartment, dropped my bag on the floor and just stood there in the dark, processing everything that had happened. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Theo. "Thank you for tonight. You're even more amazing than I imagined. Can't wait for Saturday. Sleep well." I read it 3 times, then saved his number under his name with a small heart emoji. It felt like a huge step, that tiny digital heart, like a private acknowledgement of something I wasn't ready to say out loud yet but needed to express somehow. I texted back, "Thank you for seeing me, for helping me see myself. Saturday can't come soon enough." And it was true. I'd spent so much of my life hiding, even from myself, constructing elaborate walls between who I was and who I thought I should be. But tonight, in the storm, in the privacy of Theo's car, I'd started to tear those walls down. I'd been honest about my attraction to men, about my confusion and fear, about the crush that had apparently been developing without my conscious awareness. I got ready for bed but couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, thinking about Theo, about the way his hand had felt in mine, about the kindness in his eyes when I had admitted my inexperience. I thought about Saturday, about what it would mean to go on an actual date with a man, to step into this part of myself that I'd kept hidden for so long. The fear was still there, but it was quieter now, overshadowed by excitement and this growing sense of rightness. Over the next 2 days, Theo and I texted constantly. Nothing too heavy, just little messages throughout the day. He'd send me a funny meme during his lunch break. I'd share a song that reminded me of the storm, of our conversation. We were learning each other, building this connection that felt both brand new and somehow inevitable, like we'd been moving toward this moment all along without realizing it. At work, we were careful to maintain our professional distance, but now there was this secret between us, this knowledge that made every accidental eye contact across the office feel charged with meaning. Friday afternoon, he stopped by my desk with a question about a project, but really we both knew it was just an excuse to talk. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly, so only I could hear. "I was thinking Italian. There's this little place in the West Village that's quiet and has amazing food." "Perfect," I said, and the smile he gave me made my entire day. That night I stood in front of my closet for an embarrassingly long time, trying to figure out what to wear on a first date with a man. I called my best friend, the only person who knew I'd been questioning my sexuality, and told her everything that had happened. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I'm so happy for you," she said when she'd calmed down. "You sound different, lighter, like you're finally letting yourself breathe." She was right. That's exactly how I felt, like I'd been holding my breath for years and was only now remembering how to exhale. Saturday evening arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and a gentle breeze that felt like the world's blessing. I dressed carefully, checked my reflection probably 50 times, and was ready 15 minutes early. When the buzzer rang at exactly 7, my heart leapt. Theo was standing outside my building in dark jeans and a button-down shirt that made his eyes look impossibly warm. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers, nothing too elaborate, just simple and thoughtful. "Hi," he said, and there was such genuine happiness in his voice that I felt my nervousness start to ease. "Hi," I replied, taking the flowers. "These are beautiful. Thank you." "You're beautiful," he said, and then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, was that too much? I'm kind of nervous." The admission that he was nervous too helped more than he could know. "It's not too much," I assured him. "It's perfect. You're perfect." I put the flowers in water, grabbed my jacket, and we headed out into the evening. As we walked to the restaurant, he reached for my hand and I let him take it, feeling that same electric rightness I'd felt in the car. This time, though, we were in public, walking down a busy sidewalk in the city, and holding his hand felt like the bravest thing I'd ever done. Dinner was incredible. We talked and laughed and shared food off each other's plates. The restaurant was dimly lit and romantic, and I caught myself thinking that this was what I'd been missing all along, this ease and connection and genuine attraction. When Theo looked at me across the table, I didn't have to pretend or perform or be anyone other than exactly who I was. After dinner we walked through the city, neither of us ready for the night to end. We ended up at a small park, sitting on a bench under the stars, and that's when he finally kissed me. It was gentle and sweet and everything a first kiss should be. His hand cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek, and when our lips met, I felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. This was what I'd been searching for without knowing how to name it. This connection, this attraction, this sense of coming home to myself. When we pulled apart, I was smiling so hard my face hurt. "Okay?" he asked softly, his forehead resting against mine. "More than okay," I said. "That was my first kiss with a guy." "I'm honoured," he said, and kissed me again. We stayed in that park until late, talking and kissing and planning our second date. When he finally walked me home, I felt like I was floating. At my door, he kissed me goodnight one more time and I went inside feeling transformed. The storm had brought us together, but it was everything that came after, the conversation and vulnerability and courage to be honest, that had changed my life. I'd found something in that parked car that night. I'd found Theo, yes, but more importantly, I'd found myself.